We need
There was a
answers
time
about
when
these
Daniel
mailings
Harper
now.
believed
I
that
never
peace
intended
came
any
from keeping
harm.
to
Let's look at the
himself.
facts.
After 23 years as a firefighter, he had finally retired with aching knees, weathered hands, and a quiet dream. He wasn't searching for luxury or status. He simply wanted a place where mornings began with birdsong instead of emergency sirens, where evenings ended with coffee on the porch instead of exhaustion after another dangerous shift. That dream brought him to a quiet suburban neighborhood lined with neatly trimmed lawns, flowering trees, and identical mailboxes standing proudly beside every driveway. Everything looked perfect from the outside. Every home reflected order, every sidewalk seemed spotless, and every street appeared peaceful enough to belong on the front page of a real estate magazine. Daniel knew the neighborhood had a homeowners association. He wasn't thrilled about it, but everyone assured him it was harmless. The monthly fees supposedly kept the community beautiful, protected property values, and ensured neighbors respected one another. At first, everything seemed exactly as promised. The neighbors waved politely. Children rode bicycles after school. Couples walked their dogs each evening. Packages arrived safely. Nothing suggested that behind the polished appearance hid an organization obsessed with control instead of community. Daniel settled into his new life with surprising ease. He repaired old furniture in his garage, planted vegetables in the backyard, and spent weekends restoring an antique motorcycle that had sat untouched for years. Retirement finally felt peaceful. His mailbox became one of his favorite little routines. Every afternoon, just before sunset, he would walk down the driveway, unlock the small metal door, collect letters, magazines, and sometimes postcards from old firefighter friends scattered across the country. The mailbox wasn't special. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't oversized. It was simply functional. When the previous owner moved away, Daniel had replaced the aging wooden post with a sturdy cedar post he built himself. He sanded it smooth, stained it a rich walnut color, and mounted the standard black mailbox exactly where the old one had stood. He considered it one of the first things that truly made the house feel like home. Neighbors complimented it. Delivery drivers appreciated how sturdy it looked. Even the mail carrier once smiled and commented that it was one of the easiest boxes on the route. Daniel never imagined that simple mailbox would soon become the center of a battle no one could have predicted. Only 3 weeks after finishing the installation, a white envelope appeared taped directly onto the mailbox door. Not inside. Outside. Large red letters across the front read, "Official HOA violation notice." Daniel frowned. He carefully peeled the envelope away, opened it, and unfolded the letter. The violation claimed that his mailbox post violated community architectural standards. According to the notice, the cedar post's dimensions differed slightly from approved specifications. The stain color was not one of the officially approved finishes. The decorative cap on top exceeded permitted height by approximately 1 inch. The notice demanded immediate removal. Failure to comply within 7 days would result in a $200 fine, followed by additional daily penalties. Daniel read the letter twice, then a third time. He honestly wondered whether someone had made a mistake. The mailbox looked nearly identical to every other one on the street. Some neighbors had white posts. Others had black. Several appeared older and noticeably different in shape. Nothing suggested uniformity, strict enough to justify such a warning. Rather than becoming angry, Daniel assumed the issue could be resolved with a simple conversation. He called the HOA office. The receptionist politely informed him that mailbox compliance decisions came directly from the architectural committee. He requested clarification. Instead, he was instructed to submit photographs, receipts, measurements, and an appeal form. The process sounded unnecessarily complicated. Still, Daniel followed every instruction. He measured the post. He photographed every angle. He even included copies of community guidelines highlighting sections he believed supported his installation. He mailed everything within 24 hours. For nearly 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then another envelope appeared. This one wasn't polite. The committee had denied his appeal. No explanation. No measurements. No comparison. Only another demand to remove the mailbox immediately. The fine had already increased to $400. Daniel wasn't upset about the money as much as the principle behind it. After risking his life for strangers during fires, rescues, and emergencies, it felt absurd to be treated like a criminal because of a wooden mailbox post. Still, he refused to escalate the situation. Instead, he walked through the neighborhood. What he discovered surprised him. Mailbox after mailbox violated the very rules listed in his notice. Some leaned dramatically. Others had decorative flowers wrapped around them. Several featured custom-painted posts. One family displayed seasonal decorations attached year-round. Another mailbox sat nearly 2 feet farther from the curb than regulations supposedly allowed. Yet none carried violation notices. Daniel quietly photographed them, not to expose neighbors, but simply to understand why his mailbox alone had become a target. As days passed, another pattern emerged. Whenever Daniel worked in his front yard, he noticed a silver SUV slowly driving past. The driver never waved, never smiled. She simply slowed down enough to study his property before continuing down the street. Sometimes she returned 20 minutes later. Then again the following afternoon. Neighbors began mentioning her casually. Everyone knew who she was. Rebecca Sloan, president of the HOA. People lowered their voices whenever they said her name. Some laughed nervously. Others simply changed the subject. Daniel found that strange. He'd worked with fearless firefighters who entered burning buildings without hesitation. Yet grown adults seemed uncomfortable discussing one woman driving through the neighborhood. One afternoon, while trimming rose bushes, an elderly neighbor named Margaret approached quietly from next door. She glanced toward the street before speaking. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. She explained that Daniel wasn't the first homeowner Rebecca had targeted. Over the past several years, dozens of residents had received violation notices for surprisingly minor issues. A garden hose left visible. A basketball hoop standing overnight. A welcome mat considered too colorful. A bird feeder hanging in the wrong location. Some people paid immediately. Others argued briefly before giving up. A few eventually sold their homes, exhausted by endless fines and inspections. Margaret admitted she had removed flowers from her own yard because Rebecca claimed they attracted insects. Another family reportedly replaced an entire fence after repeated citations over paint color that looked nearly identical to the approved shade. No one challenged the system for long. The stress became too much. Daniel listened carefully. Something didn't feel right. Rules existed for a reason. Communities needed standards. But standards applied unfairly stopped being rules and became tools for intimidation. That evening, Daniel reviewed every HOA document again. He noticed something interesting. The mailbox guidelines included language allowing reasonable variations if approved by the architectural committee. Yet nowhere did they define what qualified as reasonable. Even stranger, committee decisions required documented justification. His denial contained none. It simply rejected his appeal without explanation. Years spent investigating fire scenes had taught Daniel something valuable. When details disappear, someone usually wants questions to disappear with them. The mailbox itself was no longer the issue. The real question had become why one homeowner received punishment while identical situations throughout the neighborhood went unnoticed. The next morning, Daniel decided to gather facts rather than opinions. He began organizing every letter, every fine, every photograph, every guideline, and every date into a neatly labeled binder. He wasn't preparing for a fight. He was preparing for the truth. Across the street, behind perfectly closed curtains, someone watched him place another document into the growing binder. Inside the silver SUV parked a few houses away, Rebecca Sloan rested both hands on the steering wheel as she quietly observed Daniel's front yard. Her expression revealed neither anger nor satisfaction, only calculation. She had expected another homeowner who would quietly remove the mailbox, pay the fine, and move on. Instead, she was watching a retired firefighter build something far more dangerous than a mailbox. He was building a case, and neither of them yet realized that this simple dispute over a wooden post was about to expose secrets that had been hidden inside the neighborhood for years. Daniel Harper had spent most of his adult life learning one lesson that never failed him. The truth rarely announced itself. It hid behind paperwork, routines, forgotten details, and people who assumed no one would ever bother looking closely enough. That was why his binder kept growing. Every morning, after collecting his mail from the mailbox that had somehow become the neighborhood's greatest concern, Daniel added another page. Violation notices, dates, photographs, copies of HOA bylaws, architectural guidelines, meeting schedules, certified mail receipts. Every document found its place. He wasn't trying to build a weapon. He was building a timeline. The retired firefighter knew that memories faded, emotions changed, and rumors spread quickly, but documents had a habit of speaking long after people stopped talking. Within 2 weeks, something remarkable happened. Neighbors began stopping by. Not openly. Not during busy afternoons. Most came early in the morning or after sunset, glancing over their shoulders before walking up Daniel's driveway. The first visitor was Margaret again. This time, she carried a weathered folder tied with a faded blue ribbon. Inside were violation notices, dating back nearly 7 years. One letter fined her because her flower pots were considered excessively decorative. Another cited her because wind had blown leaves onto her front walkway before she returned home from visiting her sister. One notice demanded she repaint a section of fence that had already been approved the previous year. Each citation carried the same signature: Rebecca Sloan. Margaret admitted she had paid every fine simply because she was afraid. Living alone at her age, she didn't want constant conflict. She thought keeping quiet was easier. Daniel thanked her, made copies, and returned every original document. He wasn't collecting ammunition against his neighbors. He wanted evidence of patterns. The next evening, another homeowner arrived. Then another. Within days, Daniel's dining room table disappeared beneath neatly stacked folders from families across the neighborhood. The stories sounded different. The paperwork looked identical. One couple had been fined because their trash can remain visible for 3 hours after collection day. Another family received multiple citations because chalk drawings made by their grandchildren were considered visual clutter. A young veteran had been ordered to remove a wheelchair-accessible handrail until months of appeals finally forced the HOA to back down. Every case seemed isolated. Every homeowner believed they were simply unlucky. But when Daniel compared dates, signatures, inspection reports, and committee decisions, a larger picture slowly emerged. The enforcement wasn't random. It was selective. Some homes accumulated violation after violation. Others appeared almost invisible. Daniel walked through the neighborhood again. This time he carried no camera, only a small notebook. He noticed decorative mailboxes that had stood unchanged for years. Mailbox posts painted bright white. Mailbox numbers in oversized brass lettering. Posts wrapped in climbing roses. Even novelty mailboxes, shaped like miniature barns. Many clearly violated the same specifications listed in his own citation. None carried notices. One afternoon, the neighborhood mail carrier paused while delivering letters. After exchanging friendly conversation, he casually mentioned something Daniel found interesting. The route had changed very little over the years. He remembered almost every mailbox. He also remembered seeing violation notices taped to only a handful of them. Oddly enough, they almost always belonged to the same streets. Daniel thanked him without asking further questions. The observation fit perfectly into the growing pattern. Someone wasn't enforcing standards. Someone was choosing targets. As word quietly spread that Daniel was organizing documents instead of simply complaining, more residents found unexpected courage. A retired accountant named Leonard knocked on Daniel's door, carrying something completely different. Meeting minutes. Official HOA board meeting minutes. Most residents never bothered reading them. Leonard did. Years earlier, he had requested copies after questioning unexpected increases in neighborhood expenses. He noticed something strange. Many votes recorded as unanimous listed board members who had been absent from those meetings. Some approval dates didn't match financial records. Architectural decisions appeared without committee reports attached. At the time, no one seemed interested. Leonard eventually gave up. Now he handed Daniel a thick envelope. "If you're looking for answers," he said quietly, "they probably started long before your mailbox." Daniel spent hours comparing the minutes against violation dates. The more he read, the more inconsistencies appeared. Committee approvals referenced reports that didn't exist. Fines increased without documented board votes. Appeals disappeared from records entirely. One sentence especially caught his attention. Architectural enforcement would remain at the discretion of the committee chair. Discretion. One word. No definition. No limits. No oversight. That single word gave enormous power to whoever controlled enforcement. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He wasn't seeing corruption yet, but he was seeing something equally dangerous. Unchecked authority. The following weekend brought the annual neighborhood summer picnic. Normally, it was a cheerful gathering with barbecue, music, children's games, and friendly conversation. This year, however, something had changed. People smiled. They laughed. But beneath the surface, everyone seemed to be watching one another. Especially Rebecca Sloan. As HOA president, she moved through the crowd greeting residents with polished confidence. She complimented gardens, praised community improvements, spoke proudly about maintaining neighborhood standards. Anyone unfamiliar with the neighborhood would have admired her dedication. Daniel observed quietly from a distance. He noticed something else. Whenever Rebecca approached certain homeowners, their postures stiffened. Conversations became shorter. Smiles looked rehearsed. Nobody challenged her. Nobody disagreed. It wasn't respect. It looked like caution. Later that afternoon, while families gathered near the community gazebo, Rebecca announced that routine property inspections would begin the following week. She described them as necessary to preserve neighborhood excellence. Most people nodded politely. Daniel noticed several neighbors exchange uneasy glances. Another inspection. Another round of notices. Another reminder of who held authority. That evening, Daniel returned home to find a fresh envelope attached to his mailbox. Another violation. This time it wasn't about the mailbox post. Now the HOA claimed his house numbers were mounted half an inch lower than recommended. The required correction carried another $300 fine if ignored. Daniel couldn't help smiling. The timing was almost too perfect. His mailbox issue had not yet been resolved. Now entirely new violations had suddenly appeared. It confirmed what he had begun to suspect. The mailbox had never been the real issue. He had become the issue. Rather than reacting emotionally, Daniel added the notice to his binder. He compared photographs, taken the day he bought the house. The numbers hadn't changed. Interestingly, previous inspection reports contained no mention of them. The rule had existed for years. Enforcement had appeared only after he questioned the mailbox citation. Retaliation often leaves fingerprints. Daniel simply needed enough evidence for others to see them too. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Late one rainy afternoon, a former HOA board member named Susan appeared at Daniel's door carrying a sealed storage box. She had resigned nearly 2 years earlier after repeated disagreements with Rebecca. At first, she refused to explain why. Then she looked toward the street, lowered her voice, and finally spoke. Inside the box were old committee records, never included in official HOA files. Inspection schedules, internal emails, draft violation lists, handwritten notes. Susan explained that she kept copies because several board decisions had mysteriously changed after meetings ended. She feared records might someday disappear. Daniel carefully opened the folders. One spreadsheet immediately caught his attention. Properties were divided into categories. Some addresses were highlighted green, others yellow. A smaller group appeared in bright red. Next to several, red addresses were handwritten comments. Frequent complaints. Questions authority. Monitor closely. Repeat enforcement. Daniel stared silently. His own address had recently been added in fresh ink. Beside it, someone had written only 3 words. Doesn't cooperate. There it was. Not proof of financial wrongdoing. Not proof of fraud. Something perhaps even more disturbing. Evidence suggesting enforcement wasn't based solely on community rules. It appeared influenced by personal opinion. The neighborhood had quietly been divided into compliant residents and difficult ones. Daniel closed the folder slowly. The room fell silent. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows. Inside, the evidence on the dining table painted a picture that became harder to ignore with every passing hour. The mailbox dispute had opened a door. Behind that door waited years of selective enforcement, missing records, inconsistent decisions, and frightened homeowners who had believed they stood alone. Now they knew they weren't. And somewhere across the neighborhood, Rebecca Sloan had begun noticing something equally unsettling. The residents she once managed one at a time had stopped acting like isolated homeowners. They were beginning to act like a community. That realization frightened her far more than any mailbox ever could. By the time summer reached its hottest weeks, the mailbox standing at the end of Daniel Harper's driveway no longer represented a simple piece of neighborhood property. It had become a symbol. Not because it was beautiful, not because it was expensive, but because one ordinary homeowner had refused to surrender when fairness quietly disappeared. Daniel's dining room looked less like part of a house and more like an investigation office. The large wooden table was covered with carefully labeled binders. Every document had been arranged in chronological order. Violation notices, appeal letters, meeting minutes, inspection records, financial reports, architectural guidelines, photographs, certified mail receipts. Everything connected. Everything told the same story. Most importantly, everything supported facts instead of assumptions. The stack of evidence no longer belonged to Daniel alone. Nearly 30 homeowners had contributed records from the past decade. What once seemed like isolated disagreements had become impossible to ignore. Different families, different years, different homes, yet the same names appeared repeatedly. The same selective enforcement, the same unexplained decisions, the same escalating fines, the same silence whenever anyone requested clear explanations. Daniel knew there was only one place where the evidence truly mattered: the next HOA board meeting. Normally, those meetings attracted only a handful of residents. Most homeowners skipped them entirely. Some believed nothing ever changed. Others simply wanted to avoid conflict. This meeting was different before it even began. Word had quietly spread through the neighborhood. Not through gossip, not through social media, simply through conversations between neighbors who had finally realized they shared the same experiences. When the evening arrived, nearly every chair inside the community clubhouse filled within minutes. Late arrivals stood against the walls. Others watched through open windows from outside. The atmosphere remained respectful, quiet, patient, but everyone sensed something important was about to happen. Rebecca Sloan entered with the same confident expression she had worn for years. She greeted fellow board members, organized her papers, adjusted the meeting agenda. From the front of the room, everything probably looked routine. Then she looked toward the audience. Nearly every seat was occupied. People who had never attended meetings before now sat together. Margaret, Leonard, Susan, young families, retirees, veterans, new homeowners, longtime residents. For the first time in years, the community itself had shown up. Rebecca paused only briefly before beginning the meeting. Routine business came first. Landscaping updates, budget summaries, pool maintenance, committee announcements. Everything moved according to schedule. Then the public comment period opened. Normally, it lasted only a few minutes. Daniel stood. The room became completely silent. He carried no dramatic speech, no emotional presentation, only one binder. He walked calmly to the front table and placed it before the board. Then another. Then another. 5 large binders rested neatly in front of Rebecca Sloan, each labeled with simple titles: violation records, architectural decisions, meeting documentation, inspection comparisons, resident appeals. Daniel didn't accuse anyone. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he carefully explained how the mailbox citation had led him to compare enforcement across the neighborhood. He described discovering nearly identical mailbox variations, receiving no violations. He outlined timelines showing repeated citations, targeting the same homeowners. He presented architectural guidelines, applied differently depending on the resident involved. Every statement pointed toward documents already sitting on the table. Then Margaret stood. She quietly described paying years of fines because she believed she had no choice. Leonard followed. He explained discrepancies he found in meeting records years earlier. Susan presented copies of committee documents never included in official files. Another resident described repeated citations after questioning landscaping expenses. A veteran explained months spent defending an accessibility modification already protected by law. One after another, neighbors spoke. None shouted. None insulted anyone. They simply shared experiences supported by paperwork. As the stories accumulated, something remarkable happened. People around the room began recognizing similarities they had never connected before. Someone remembered receiving a violation immediately after disagreeing during a meeting. Another recalled being ignored after requesting clarification. Another discovered dates matching inspection reports from completely different streets. Individual frustrations transformed into a documented pattern. Rebecca attempted to respond. She insisted enforcement always required professional judgment. She explained that every property differed slightly. She maintained that committee discretion protected community standards. Under ordinary circumstances, those explanations might have ended the discussion. This time they didn't. Because the documents kept speaking, Daniel opened one binder to photographs taken on the same afternoon. 6 mailboxes, 5 clearly outside stated specifications. Only one violation. His. He turned another page. Inspection reports showed identical issues, receiving opposite decisions. Another page revealed appeal requests marked denied without explanation, while similar requests elsewhere received approval. No arguments, just comparisons. The room remained quiet. Even board members who had previously supported Rebecca spent long moments reading the documents placed before them. One member slowly removed his glasses. Another reread meeting minutes twice. Neither appeared prepared for what they were seeing. Finally, an elderly homeowner whom few people knew particularly well stood near the back. For years, he had remained almost invisible during meetings. This evening, he carried something unexpected. A cardboard archive box. Inside were newsletters, election notices, and correspondence he had saved since moving into the neighborhood over 15 years earlier. Among them rested copies of older HOA bylaws. Not revised editions. Original versions. When compared with current documents, an important discovery emerged. Several enforcement procedures had quietly changed years earlier without recorded homeowner approval. Certain protections, allowing independent appeal reviews, had disappeared. Requirements for written explanations had been removed. Board discretion had expanded dramatically. No meeting minutes reflected those amendments being properly adopted. The discovery shifted the entire conversation. The issue was no longer Daniel's mailbox. It was governance. Within minutes, several homeowners requested an independent review of HOA records. Others asked that all pending fines be suspended until that review concluded. For the first time, even board members supported the motion. The vote passed. Not unanimously, but decisively. Rebecca Sloan sat motionless. The authority she had exercised for years had depended on something fragile. Silence. That silence had ended. Over the following weeks, an independent property management consultant reviewed years of records. The findings surprised even longtime residents. Hundreds of violations lacked consistent documentation. Appeals had been processed differently from homeowner to homeowner. Financial penalties varied despite nearly identical circumstances. Numerous enforcement actions failed to follow procedures described in governing documents. The review did not claim every decision had been malicious, but it concluded that enforcement had become inconsistent, subjective, and insufficiently documented. The recommendations were immediate. All disputed fines would be suspended pending reevaluation. Architectural guidelines would be rewritten in plain language. Inspection procedures would require photographic evidence. Appeal decisions would include written explanations. Committee authority would be divided among multiple members instead of concentrating in one individual. Most significantly, the neighborhood voted to hold new board elections. For the first time in many years, nearly every homeowner participated. Rebecca Sloan chose not to seek another term. She moved from the neighborhood several months later. No celebration followed. No one mocked her departure. Most residents had never wanted revenge. They had wanted fairness. Daniel declined repeated requests to run for HOA president. He smiled politely each time. After spending a career protecting people from emergencies, he had no desire to spend retirement leading meetings. Instead, he accepted a smaller role. He volunteered to help organize homeowner education sessions, explaining community rules in simple, understandable language. He believed informed neighbors created stronger communities than frightened ones. Gradually, the atmosphere changed. People attended meetings without anxiety. Questions received answers. Appeals received explanations. Inspections became predictable instead of personal. The mailbox that started everything remained exactly where Daniel had built it. No one ever ordered its removal again. Months later, children walking home from school often passed Daniel sitting on his front porch with a cup of coffee. They never knew why adults sometimes smiled at the simple cedar mailbox standing beside his driveway. To them, it looked ordinary. To the neighborhood, it represented something much larger. A reminder that fairness depends on ordinary people willing to ask reasonable questions. That communities grow stronger when rules apply equally. That respect cannot be demanded through fear. And that even the smallest object, a wooden mailbox standing quietly beside a suburban street, can become the beginning of justice when someone chooses truth over intimidation. Daniel often reflected on the strange path retirement had taken. He had purchased a house searching for peace. Instead, he had helped an entire neighborhood rediscover it. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't keeping his mailbox. It was giving every homeowner something far more valuable. A voice that no one could quietly tape over with another violation notice.